Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from production to conception all the way to release and reception. It is episode 5 of season 3. Chris, it was your choice. It's a new movie. Drum roll. What did you choose?
I chose for us to trace the life of a movie with a very long title. It's called Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. And it's directed by Josh Greenbaum, but probably more known as a Kristen Wiig movie, along with Annie Mumolo, who co-wrote and co-stars with Wiig, the SNL alum, in a movie that, I don't know about you, Dan, but one reason I chose the movie is because it was one of the one of the last movies that I remember very clearly seeing the trailer for in the movie theaters in the before times.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I remember seeing it, and then my first reaction was, "How is this possible? Like, what were the forces that came together that thought, like, oh, let's give this? We don't know what the budget is on this, but it's a wide release. Technically, it was supposed to be from Lionsgate, which is a semi-major studio. I'd say top 5 studio, top 6. So it's at least 10 million. If not more, maybe 15, 20. I don't really know what it's at, but I can tell you with confidence probably above $15 million. How did this get greenlit? Like, what was the process? What was going on here? But what was there's got to be a bigger impetus to choose this film. There's something here for you. What is it?
This is the first season of the show where I'm regularly watching the movies with my wife.
Yeah.
I was kind of looking at Malcolm and Marie, but that got dragged pretty quickly on Netflix. And once I read more about it, I decided to hands off on that one. And ultimately, it really traced back to one of our first episodes, which was the Eurovision movie. And I remembered that's like our shortest episode. It was a pretty quick in and out. And I feel like we had been covering a lot of heavy like down the rabbit hole subjects, especially just coming off of our episode last week, doing a deep dive on Michael Mann's Thief from 1981. And I feel like so many of us, I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm looking for the fluff, for the escapism. I want to sit and just like forget about the horrifying world for 105 minutes. Maybe that's a little bit too many minutes, but but still, like I don't know. I was just sucked into the idea of just like sitting on the couch with my wife and laughing. Maybe not a lot. And yeah, it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to be diversionary adequately.
Yeah, I mean, okay, we already started setting. We were putting the goalpost really wide. I guess the goalpost is what that's supposed to be. It's very wide, or the high bar very low.
Yeah,
I get where you're coming from, without a doubt, and it's definitely a diversion comedy. Let's do the plot line of this thing. So it was released this last Friday on, I guess, PVOD, so it cost $20 to get. Not cheap. Of course I didn't pay that, give me a break. And so this is the plot here. The story of best friends Barb and Star who leave their small Midwestern town. Let me stop you there. Midwestern. This is the thing that I kept coming back to in this movie. Let me finish the log line. I'll go back to this point. Who leave their small Midwestern town for the first time to go on vacation in Vista Del Mar, Florida, where they soon find themselves tangled up in adventure, love, and a villain's evil plot to kill everyone in town. Back to this Midwestern point.
Like, this is the part of the log line that you're sticking with.
But it goes into the entire movie, and there's like a point that like I can't get over. Okay, so if you're from the Midwest, and both of us are born and bred in the Midwest, we grew up in the Midwest in Wisconsin, which is not the center of the Midwest, but pretty darn close.
It's the heartland, baby.
Yeah, the heartland. Nebraska is not the Midwest. And like it doesn't really, it's a different sort of culture as well. It's like if you ask somebody in Iowa, do they live in the Midwest? They're going to say yes. If you ask somebody in the middle of Nebraska, they would say, no, I live in the Great Plains. That'd be like asking somebody in North Dakota if you live in the Midwest. You don't live in the Midwest. It's just like a different sort of vibe. So that's number one. Also with that, their accent. Their accent is not from Nebraska either. Their accent is like, what would you call their accent?
I mean, it is. I think it's Midwestern mom, like a very absurdist version of that.
But like, where would you pinpoint where that accent's from?
It's
not from Ohio. It's not from Illinois.
Are you trying to lead me to Minnesota?
I mean,
the place where I live.
There's definitely some Minnesota in there, is there not?
Sure.
There's some Minnesota. There's some Fargo. There's some Wisconsin, right? A little bit of Wisconsin, maybe some Michigan, but definitely a very traditional sort of upper Midwest accent. I just want to point those things out before we dive deeper.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, it is a split second title card. You could have blinked and you missed it. It really ultimately, in my opinion, doesn't matter at the end of the day what state they picked it. They picked for the hometown of these two wacky
soft rock characters. Nebraska is where they're from.
I do want to point. I did some quick Googling while you were talking, Dan, and according to Encyclopedia Britannica, Nebraska is one of the Midwest states.
There is no way Nebraska is the Midwest. Let's do a survey with listeners.
Okay. Yes. Tweet at us. Let us know. Is Nebraska?
We'll do a survey state? Below the episode with the Nebraska is the Midwest. What an absurd claim.
Okay.
So Britannica, is that out of print? I mean, that's not
even real. Let's get back to task here. Kristen Wiig.
Let's talk about the movie.
And Annie Mumolo. I mean, honestly, when I saw this trailer when it was in theaters, they did this. It was kind of obnoxious, to be honest, and I'm really glad they didn't really like hang their hat on it in the movie, but of like these extreme close-ups of the hair, the culottes, etc. And so, like, I remember in the trailer being like, "Wait, so that's obviously Kristen Wiig. Who's with her?" Because Annie Mumolo is not nearly as much of a household name, and so I was wondering, like, is it Maya Rudolph playing her, co-star? Is it? There's so many other people it could have been. But apparently, Annie Mumolo and Kristen Wiig have been kind of lock in step for a number of years, going all the way back to The Groundlings, right? And so when we look at these two actors, you would automatically think like, okay, this is Kristen Wiig's movie. But I mean, that was one of the things that stood out right away, is that while Mumolo had a bit part in Bridesmaids, that these two have kind of been like, they refer to each other in interviews as they're each other's creative wife. So there's a strong partnership here that, I mean, I was completely unaware of. And I mean, I feel like both of us have followed Kristen Wiig pretty, closely over the years, having followed her ever since she debuted on SNL when we were in college.
Yeah, it sounds like they were super close in the 20s. I think Kristen Wiig moved there when she got out of school or whatever. And really kind of got into the Groundlings. And I think Mumolo is from Orange County. So I think she went to Berkeley too. So she's a California person. And it sounds like, they wrote a ton. And then I think there was a moment when Wiig got SNL. I think Annie was sort of like, oh no, we're kind of going to break up. But it sounds like they kept very close touch and were writing together throughout that entire time period that she was on SNL. Which, culminated, of course, in Bridesmaids, which, they co-wrote. And it's obviously one of the biggest comedies of the last, 15, 20 years. I think one of the better comedies of the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. But kind of definitely a very different style than this, right? Like that was more of the Judd Apatow kind of dramedy of the mid-2000s. And that kind of maybe ended that phase in 2011. This is way more absurdist. And like I think the style of this film, which is farcical, is a lot more indebted to their improv days back in LA together. It seems like, and when you like look at like how they talked about making the film and stuff like that, it does seem born of those earlier improv days and kind of workshopping these two characters together for like 20 years now, probably more. And so it kind of has that comfortable feel to it. What about the director here? Is this guy well known? Like, I didn't really know him at all.
Yeah, me neither. He is largely a documentary filmmaker. His name's Josh Greenbaum, and he won the Audience Award at South by Southwest in 2013 for his kind of comedic documentary. Not quite a mockumentary, though Wiig definitely refers to his work as mockumentary, but he has like this like playful, joyous kind of style of documentary filmmaking that is not farcical, but definitely leans heavily on interviews and conversations with interview subjects that lend itself to being a more crowd pleasing style of documentary. That first one was called The Short Game, about kid professional golfers, and then he did a TV docu-series called Behind the Mask about mascots, and they did several episodes of New Girl and Fresh Off the Boat for Fox and ABC respectively. But it was at the screening, one of the advanced screenings for his 2017 documentary Becoming Bond, where he met Wiig, and she just happened to be in the audience, and she could tell, he kind of focused on what's that guy, the dude that played Bond for just one movie, George Lazenby.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of a fun idea for a documentary. Like how did we wind up compared to all the other, actors in the Bond franchise with a guy that from Australia that just played Bond for one single movie. And so it's kind of I haven't seen it, but apparently it's a different take on the documentary genre that doesn't go so far into mockumentary, but definitely is not your straight serious documentary like you typically find with these kinds of things. And then he also did specifically a documentary on comedians, including Dana Carvey and several other big 90s names, called Too Funny to Fail. And so it seemed like Wiig was looking for an interesting thread to pull together. And also Mumolo said in one of the interviews, I believe with Variety, that they considered taking on the directorial duties themselves, but being co-stars in the film and as well as being in charge of the script, they wanted somebody to help them out. Like, this is a huge production going to the Caribbean to film in July, an elaborate series of set pieces. And you wouldn't think that a documentary filmmaker would be able to take on this kind of level of project.
Yeah.
But apparently, a little luck, a little trust and faith, and they went with a newbie, which is typically not something you would do for something like this, especially for somebody like Wiig, who's been, who broke through with one of the biggest comedies of the past couple decades, like you mentioned, Bridesmaid.
And who's the real wild card here is Jamie Dornan. What's that all about? So we know him from, he's a very good-looking man. He used to be a model, but he turned actor. Of course, you know him from 50 Shades of Grey and that whole series. And The Fall, I don't really know that. Robin Hood, but he's known from 50 Shades of Grey, that whole series. What do you make of him showing up in this film?
It's a strange choice, and honestly, I didn't even know it until I looked up the cast the day before press and play on the movie. Yeah. It makes sense. You've got to have somebody fill that role, and there's definitely that kind of vibe you get where it's like you're just looking for somebody that could be a pretty face that can play the straight guy character, but also have some kind of comedic stylings, maybe intentionally or otherwise. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it made me think about Dan Stevens in Eurovision.
Yeah, totally.
Which I know we disagreed on when we did that episode. But what I really like about Dornan in this role is that it feels like he's halfway in on the joke,
Yeah, you could call it something. I mean,
it seems like he did an interview with Entertainment Weekly about his role in the film, and it seems like he seems game, but he seems like he's kind of out of he's out of his depths, and that I think is what makes it fun. It maybe makes it a little cringy, but it makes it more interesting, I think, than just having yet another person sink their teeth into like a hammy scenery chewing role.
Yeah, like normally this role will be played by, in this whole crew, another Groundlings person or Second City person or another improv sort of standard that we get in these movies. So it is a very interesting pick to bring him in here, especially as somebody, he's so well known from, what'd you call erotic thriller series? I don't know what you call it, erotic fan fiction, which is what it is. And kudos to like, number one, getting him to do it and like making that choice, because it does add something really odd to the film. And I do think the purpose of this film in a lot of different ways is sort of just to be odd and abnormal. and it's very absurdist. I did not expect it to be half as absurd as it is when I started watching it. And then within the first 10 or 12 minutes, the first 10 minutes, you're like, okay, I get this. This is kind of like an SNL comedy, blah, blah, blah. But then it just goes off the rails pretty immediately, like right when they get down to Florida, and it just kind of like ups the ante over and over again. I think one thing to note too about the production of this, Gloria Sanchez Productions, which is sort of an offshoot of Gary Sanchez Productions, which you know as Will Ferrell and Adam McKay. And so basically his original assistant, Jessica Elbaum, who then became a kind of a producer for Will Ferrell, she ended up saying, hey, I want to do this production company. She starts it. They did Sleeping with Other People in 2015, which nobody saw. Right. But they did Booksmart, which is huge, Hustlers, which was huge, and they also did Eurovision Song Contest, Story of Fire Saga. And so that's an interesting sort of angle here. Without that backing, I don't see this movie getting made. I think it's that specific, almost like incubator within sort of Gary Sanchez Productions, and using sort of Will Ferrell's sort of power and the clout that they got from these other movies that allowed this movie to happen. Because it's not, it doesn't look cheap at all. Like, especially that like dance routine when they get to the hotel. I mean, that's a pretty AAA sort of montage that they put together when they call it. And so yeah, it's not a cheaply made film at all, but yeah, I think it's something to note that how these things get made. It's not just like Kristen, Wiig, and Mumolo like saying, we will make this movie. It took a long time. Like they said, 5-6 years.
Yep. To
get this thing really off the ground and get it moving. Where did it come from? Where is this Barb and Star? What is this all about?
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned earlier, it seems pretty random that they, decide to invest in these brand new characters, and I think that's important to note about this movie. Like, there's no previous IP. There's not even like an SNL sketch that this originates from. This literally originates just from the two actors and co-writers hanging out on while writing Bridesmaids, and coming up with this basically extended universe. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
of
I
characters?
would say that's very accurate. Yeah.
And so they were just riffing and thinking about, what would the characters in Bridesmaids, what would their moms be like, right? So Lillian, Maya Rudolph's character, they basically came up with her mom as a potential like addition to the script, but especially Bridesmaids, I think that's one of my issues with that movie. I it's great, but it's a little on the long side, a little overstuffed, and so
very long,
one of the things, as a lot of Apatow movies are, so one of the things they decided to do was just excise the fat from that part, but that relationship still seemed to like just continue with them, and so I don't know if this movie's been cooking for 5.5-6 years, and Bridesmaids came out in 2011. It seems like they perhaps were just like sticking with this character of Lillian's mom for at least 3 or 4 years before they realized like this deserves its own centerpiece, and so that's where then they decide to go all in. And I like one of the quotes. I don't remember if it's Wiig or Mumolo, where they basically decide that they going to move forward with them freely. Don't overthink it. Don't make it like focused on reality, like Bridesmaids arguably is to some degree.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, like you mentioned, kind of the end of the era Apatow movies, they were trying to get away from that, trying to go see how silly they could get with it. And
yeah, I mean, what really interests me about this is like the source of these characters. And like they talk about, there's a quote from Mumolo. They probably came from a lot of different places in our heads, but some of it's like your mom, some of it's like your aunt and other family relatives. But more and more, we're realizing how much they're us. And then she says in the New York Times, or Wiig says, we definitely gravitated towards characters of a middle-aged realm. It was almost an afterthought where years later we were like, wow, all of our characters are middle-aged women who have crazy wigs. And then there's another thing from the New York Times where she basically says, kind of talking about these characters that have grown over the years, the more we talk about it, we do realize these characters are a lot of who we are, which I find interesting. And I'm going back to the Midwestern thing because I can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're obviously supposed to be from like Nebraska, Midwest, whatever. And like they say, oh, it's kind of, extensions of who we are and stuff like that. None of them are from the Midwest, and none of them ever lived in the Midwest. Mumolo has always lived in Los Angeles. She grew up in California, was born in Irvine, went to high school there. I went through their entire histories. None of them have ever lived in the Midwest at all. And so I find it sort of like, did you feel like there was an authenticity? Let's throw out the Nebraska thing. Let's say Nebraska is part of the Midwest or middle of the country. Did you feel like there's an authenticity to that, or did it feel just sort of like an improv character they just created?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to dig into that. I mean, it also brings to mind the conversations that erupted over the characters in Fargo, right?
Yeah.
Which is, still absurdist, but perhaps that cut a little too close for some people because it was played so straight, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's, the kernel is here too, where it's like the kernel is the stereotype, and then they just went in this far off trajectory, and ultimately,
let me stop you there.
Okay.
What's the stereotype?
The stereotype of like the Midwest mom with the accent who is obsessed with magazines and like big hair and these kinds of things. Like it's almost rooted in an antiquated stereotype at this point.
I would say, like, it feels like a stereotype that you would see in the 90s of the Midwest, right?
Yeah.
It feels like it's a throwback to a throwback stereotype from an older time period.
Yes.
I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, I would say, yeah. I mean, that's the one thing where it's sort of like, yeah, look, it's an absurdist comedy. Like, why am I diving into it? But I think that to me, there was just sort of like, okay, I'm from the Midwest, and not a lot of this connects, like with like how they're talking or how they're thinking, and also there's nothing specific that they're spoofing. Like, you'll have stuff like Talbots and Chicos in the Kirkland brand at Costco, which is kind of funny, or actually was really funny. But then outside of that, it's just not, I don't know. There's nothing there to hold on to as like an actual reference to any sort of actual person that I know. I guess I would say, like, do you know anybody in your life that you think would be, I know that this is an absurdist version of people, but do you think that there's anybody in your life that that's close to this?
No. I mean, I think that's part of the appeal, though, is that it's like a fantasy. It's fantasy. It's out of this world. Like, I mean, I guess I didn't even care to Google it. Is Vista Del Mar even a real place in Florida?
No. And Vista Del Mar is, I was thinking about, like, because like, oh, even going down to Florida and stuff like that, like that part of it as well, it's sort of like, it's not really, it's all fantasy, because like, it's like they didn't even film it in Florida, number one, but Florida isn't really like that, I don't think. Like, it doesn't really have those elements to it. I mean, some of it is like that, but there's no specific, I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is they're not actually spoofing anything real,
right?
It's just like pure fantasy, absurdist sort of style comedy.
And I think that's part of a fair criticism in general of the film, is that because it doesn't have like I don't know, a real origin to like grab onto, like some of the more gut busting comedies do, you're kind of left with that. Like I used the word fluff earlier, and I mean, I wouldn't use fluff to describe some of my favorite comedies, and I don't think this is one of my favorite comedies, but that's kind of it's a double-edged sword, if you will, where like if you're going to make it so ridiculous that it doesn't even have any semblance of reality, then it's really gonna just feel kind of ephemeral at the end of the day. But on the plus side, I think we did get something that we really haven't gotten in a long time.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of money and resources being put into being as goofy as you possibly can. Yeah. And maybe I don't know, a half to 2/3 of it lands, but that's enough. That's enough for me nowadays, because we don't get stuff like this. Can you think of the last movie like this?
Well, that's what I was trying to think of the entire time I was watching this. I was like, what does this remind me of? The only sort of parallel I could say is Hot Rod, which was kind of like, when was that? When was Hot Rod? Is that like 10 years ago, or probably a lot longer?
More like 2008, maybe?
Yeah, 2008, I think. 2007. Hot Rod, and then there's like Napoleon Dynamite, but like no, it's not. There's shades of it, but Hot Rod feels the closest to me. Or someone also brought up Pop Star.
Yeah.
And I thought like, yeah, sort of. This is more absurdist than that. This is really just kind of out there. Because what is it parodying? It's not parodying anything. It's like made up improv characters that kind of they just let it run. And they said that, like they even said, what was it? Like, they talk about the writing process. They're basically like, yeah, normally when you're writing something, you don't put in all of this stuff because you know what people are going to say. You know what's not going to be censored, but it's going to be like, oh, you can't put this in there. It doesn't make any sense. And then they said on this one, we put it all in there. Like, let's see what happens. We didn't want to censor ourselves as we went. And you definitely has that free flowing spirit to it. And in terms of what you're, saying, like it feels something different. Josh Greenbaum said to RogerEbert.com, he said, I grew up on John Hughes and then fell in love with what Judd Apatow has done. But a lot of that was more in a dramedy space. And this is a return to fun and comedy with a capital C. So it's obviously intended to create something new. And at the very least, that's what they've done, is that it's not like any other comedy. Like, what was the biggest comedy last year? I don't even know. Like what were big comedies of the last few years? Like
Good
Blockers,
Boys,
Game Nights. Yeah, that one. Yep. Can you think of anything?
No,
that is like this.
Not only do a lot of older films come up when in conversation in this movie in terms of like SNL stars like Andy Samberg, but also I'm getting a lot of which is almost coincidental because we also watched this for our group night movie. Constant references to the Zucker brothers and the Naked Gun series, Top Secret, which I think is fair, but like you said, they're not parodying anything. So then that got me thinking about probably one of the best comedies of all time, which was mentioned while we were watching The Naked Gun with friends over Zoom, Carl Reiner's The Jerk, which is
good point.
Completely off the wall absurdist comedy that doesn't parody any or spoof anything in particular.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a big connection there. And another big connection with those two, with The Jerk and Barb and Star, is that at the end of the day, and I really like what Greenbaum said about this in his interview about like what he was trying to go for, is like this just pure joy. Like joy is the overwhelming factor here. And there's another big connection to going back to another SNL star, Mike Myers, Austin Powers, which 100%. Once again is parodying something particular, but like even down to the point where you have Kristen Wiig playing both the hero and the villain as mirror images of each other, right? Another
very indebted to Austin Powers. That aspect specifically.
Right. And one last connection that I thought was really apt from Letterboxd user Chris Evangelista that you put in our notes.
Oh yeah.
He wrote, "This is like a Muppet movie, but all the Muppets are played by humans. It's so deliriously silly, sure to become a cult classic," which I think is total right on too.
I think that's really right on, because a lot of the social, I've read all through like the Reddit comments on our movies. I did a deep dive on this thing and all the Twitter stuff. And like definitely the people that reacted well to the film see it just like that. It's like this very kind of nuanced, absurdist, strange trip that if you do get on board, you're probably going to enjoy it. But you have to get on board. Like you have to sort of go with it. Like it's like a yes and thing from improv. Like you just got to let this thing fly,
and like
and you'll get something out of it.
And like the Muppets, it's not a trip that is, subversive by any means, I don't think. It's just straight up wholesome. Like there's no, I don't see any like badness or meanness in this movie. It just feels so pure, which I think is maybe one of the reasons why it's connecting so much during the, nth hour of the pandemic.
Yeah, the endless pandemic that we're in. I will say this. I will have to, and Dornan says this in Entertainment Weekly. He said he loves comedies like Airplane, Hot Shots, Naked Gun. I don't see the connection really at all to those films. I just don't see it. Like Naked Gun, we just watched. And it just like that is such a dry sense of humor, and this is not dry humor at all. Like this is just like in your face absurdist. I'm saying something because it's weird, whereas Naked Gun, it's a very different comedic style, and
Yeah.
it's not just the difference between spoof and farce or whatever. It's just a different setup and different comedic style.
And I think the big thing, and I agree, especially after just watching it with you and our friends, is that I think it comes down to, I actually think Top Secret is a better Zucker production to compare it to.
Yeah.
And I think it literally comes down to the performers. Like,
sure,
if you have Leslie Nielsen and O.J. Simpson, yeah, they play it straight 100%. Like, Naked Gun is like if Jamie Dornan played all of the characters, right? Yeah. Whereas in Top Secret, you've got Val Kilmer, who is smart enough to be in on it along with several other co-stars, and he's like smiling the whole time, just like Barb and Star are in this movie. So it all depends on the performers. And I think that at the end of the day, that was it. I don't think this movie would have worked as well if they had, I don't know, gotten like Kristen Stewart and Emma Stone to play Barb and Star. That would be horrible.
Never would have worked. That sounds like a Hulu holiday movie. In any event, a couple of things from the production notes that I was just thinking about. Like, there's two things that stood out to me, and just thinking about how movies are made. But like, essentially, so Dornan said that on the script, it basically says his character Edgar emotionally dances in a footloose fashion. He didn't even think about it. He goes down to production, and they're like, "Oh, we need to get you a choreographer." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like this one line that ends up being, I think, one of the more funnier sequences in the entire film. And it's long.
It's a highlight.
And it's elaborate. And the same thing, Greenbaum says, they had 100 dancers for the hotel thing, blah, 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 the huge musical number. They said they had to shoot it over the course of the entire production. It was that big and intricate. But in another interview, which I didn't put here, he basically said that in the script, it just said there's a musical number when they arrive at the hotel, and that's it. And he didn't realize until he started to talk to Kristen Wiig might have said this. She's like, "Oh yeah, we got to do that." And so they wrote like a song and did this whole thing after the script was already written, and they're already like on set to produce this stuff. So Amazing. It was like, there's a real sort of like, there's definitely like an improv vibe to a lot of what's happening. I don't think that hurts it at all, because I think that like the dance and musical aspects of this film work really well. But they were not super planned out before they got on set to really do it, which I thought was really fascinating.
And that kind of goes back to, the whole point of having Greenbaum on hand as a director to help organize probably that still kind of half instilled haphazardness that comes from being an SNL star for so long. Like, they're used to like working on, on or past deadline all the time. I did want to put a quick plug in for, you mentioned this musical number a couple times now, and just like how expensive the movie looks, but also just like how good the movie looks. It's shot by Toby Oliver, who is usually Blumhouse's, main cinematographer.
Happy Death Day to You. Is that the guy?
Yeah, and Get Out and Fantasy Island, and so
Get Out was shot so well. That was on $5 million budget, $4 million budget. Amazing.
Right. So like going back to your question about the budget as well, as like, maybe they were, one of the reasons they were able to finagle this was not just Will Ferrell's money, but also because, they made sure to collect a crew that knew how to do things low key. And if Greenbaum's only done documentaries before, he's probably used to working on a shoestring as well. Yeah, that's a good point. So it's really impressive. Everything from the coloring to the choreography is just, it's pretty impeccable for a movie that clearly has no interest in, formality or craft.
But that's because it was meant for wide release.
Yeah.
Right. So this thing, we can't forget that this was, when was it supposed to get released originally? I can't remember. Last summer, right?
I'd imagine if we were seeing trailers in the theater back in January 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were going to put this out, and I'm actually kind of interested as to why they pushed it to streaming, because as of I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, this was just pushed theatrically till later in the year, and then kind of out of the blue, they're like, we're not doing that. We're just going to do PVOD, which is kind of a bold decision to make by Lionsgate. I don't know why you would do that, or like what the business decisions were to do that, because they are doing film releases now. Right. Half the country acts like there's no pandemic. So like, it is what it is. Like what's big stuff that's been out? I mean, Wonder Woman was in theaters, right? Like, so I can't really figure out why they decided to do that. But But I don't know. I mean, does it take away from the film? The big question, moving on to release, do you think this would have done well in the box office? I can tell you what I think right now.
No, I can't imagine it would have done well, and I think maybe that's part of the reason that they decided to push it to PVOD.
There's literally no way in hell this movie, like, there's nothing to pull people. And what's the demographic? What's the demographic? Like, if you think like the 4 quads, over and under 25 years old, male, female.
No, it's over
male, 25 females, maybe.
It's mostly females in their 30s, and that's about it. Yeah. And anybody else that follows Kristen Wiig, like I feel like it wouldn't have done horribly, but it definitely wouldn't have done as good as like even a movie like Game Night or Good Boys did.
No,
because it's missing that either realistic aspect or the cross genre aspect. There is no money in.
There's not a lot of money here.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of money here.
And if you take a look at the stuff that Lionsgate is looking to still release this year, it's stuff like Spiral, the new take on the Saw franchise.
They're a genre trash studio.
Yeah,
like, I can't even understand how they got involved in this either. Like, it's just sort of like Lionsgate's genre films.
Yep.
Like I don't even know what they're called. The Witch Hunter, was that something they did? I don't know. Just put witch and like ghoul or something, and they probably did it.
Right.
But so if it did get released, but like the critics love this thing, right? 82% all critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 86%. Metacritic's a little bit lower at 68, and I will say the actual scores from critics are in the 60s. So it's, again, this is where like Rotten Tomatoes can be pretty misleading, where it's basically like 82% sounds like it's almost like, well, that's really good. But if you look at the actual scores, they're actually 66 out of 100, which doesn't sound nearly as good, does it?
Yeah. No.
And the audience seems to like it. I remember when I posted that thing on Slack that was like, critics score 82%, audience score 25%.
Yeah,
that was very early on.
And yeah, now the audience score is at 77, real score of 80. Letterboxd score of 72, which is pretty high for a straight comedy. IMDb of 66, bringing it down to earth a little bit more. But at the end of the day, like, I think that for a movie that's so goofy and so like just recklessly silly, that I don't know if you could get better scores than that. Like, what were the scores for Hot Rod back in 2007?
Much lower than this.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a timing factor, and maybe that was also part of the decision to put it to PVOD instead of theatrical. Is like, strike while the iron's hot. Nobody's putting anything out like this right now, and maybe people are willing to shell out $20 because they're depressed, stuck at their house, right?
Yeah.
And they just want to laugh. So one of my favorite reviews was by Sheila O'Malley at RogerEbert.com. I think she made a good encapsulation of what makes this movie work, which is, she says, what matters is the energy and the confident propulsion of all the silliness grounded by Wiig and Mumolo, whose characterizations may be broad, but never empty caricatures. And I think that goes back to the whole Midwest mom thing, is like, you definitely could have played these characters and it would have just rang hollow and mean. But because there's so much just like wholesomeness to the proceedings, even when it gets kind of scatological, it's still like Wiig and Mumolo do really feel like in these roles, like they are half actually Barb and Star and half making fun of somebody like Barb and Star, but it's definitely more balanced towards good-natured kind of humor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one quick middling review, which I also kind of agree with, from Beatrice Loiza of New York Times. Barb and Star's oddball palavering has its charms thanks to Wiig and Mumolo's natural rapport, but the character's silliness is less gut-wrenchingly funny than it is mostly weird and whimsical. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it didn't leave me in stitches like even Pop Star did. Like, I was losing it. I was in tears at the end of Pop Star.
I don't like Pop Star.
Oh my gosh.
Just like right over my head. I'm like,
oh my gosh. Every musical number. But but there's enough in the movie that, I'll take whimsy.
Some people don't like whimsy, like Mick LaSalle out of the San Francisco Chronicle. I have to confess, Mick LaSalle is probably one of my favorite critics. He's become a little bit of a curmudgeon, and there's a great, he just destroys the film. He gives it like a 0 stars essentially. I'll just read like one part of his quote here. It's very long, but I'll just read sort of the byline here. In a sense, it's an experiment that doesn't work. The fact that it doesn't work reveals something about the nature of comedy itself. It seems like an attempt by two longtime collaborators to write and star in a film that they themselves consider to be funny, not to worry about story or character, but to create instead a transparent joke machine. Okay. There's a great the at the end here. It especially should work, but considering that there are really lots of jokes in this movie, as isolated jokes, they're not bad. Lots of the bits are unexpected, clever, and even imaginative. They show unmistakable comedic gifts, yet Barb and Star remains from start to finish the living death of comedy. Thank you, Mick LaSalle. Like, it's just, I don't agree with him. Like, I think he's being way too harsh on the film here. But I actually don't think he's that far off in terms of sort of like, you know, like we can view films in a lot of different ways, right? And like, you know, like I watched Home Again. Who made that? Nancy Meyers, I think her daughter did. Reese Witherspoon. I watched that twice this weekend. It was on IFC. I left it on loop, and I really enjoyed having it on the background. It felt like my version of a warm, comfy fire. That's one type of film, and that's one type of enjoyment, right? And so I think what you said to kind of start out, like, this is a diversion film, right? It's wholesome, it's joyful, it's absurdist. It takes us away from a very trying time, I think, in most people's lives. And that's another type of enjoyment. I think what's hard, though, as like a film critic or an art critic, someone like Mick LaSalle, who has his PhD in film studies, he's not like some schlub, right? What's hard, I think, is that he's trying to contextualize the film throughout film history, right? And then when you try to do that and slot this in somewhere, number one, it doesn't really fit, right? We already discussed that. Like, you could say Hot Rod and Pop Star, but it's even weirder than that in a lot of ways,
right?
And then if you don't know what to do with it and you don't like the comedy, there's going to be a gut reaction of like to other like turn this into the other in some sense, right? And I think that's what he's doing here. I think it's really easy to do. It's sort of like, this doesn't make, I mean, and I kind of agree with him. Like, I don't get it. I laughed like a few times throughout the film. I can't imagine spending years making this and being like, oh yeah, this is it. This is like what I'm going to do. And that's not to disparage the work. It's just like, it's a very confident, absurdist thing to do. And I don't think that it works. And it's like, there is some level of judgment there, right? Of course. But I mean, that's the question. It's, I think the big question about this, and one of the reasons we do this podcast, is where is this film going to be in 10 years? Like, when we're doing Film Trace in 2031, is this going to be an anniversary episode? Are people going to look back and be like, oh yeah, like this was an important film, or a really, maybe not an important film culturally, but like an important film in my life?
I think that's a good question. I think one big factor that we haven't mentioned at all is the fact that, unlike so many of the other touch points for comedic movies throughout film history that we've talked about, there's no really corollary for a female-driven comedy. And even looking at Bridesmaids, which, yeah, definitely is worthy, even though I don't love it, I think it is worthy of that, 10th anniversary look back. And will probably continue to be 20th anniversary, so on and so forth. Will this one? I don't know. I think it's still stuck. It's too idiosyncratic to know whether it will wind up. Like, I think no one would have expected that anybody would be talking about Hot Rod on a podcast.
But are we the only people talking about Hot Rod?
I don't think so. I think it is.
Yeah, you're right.
I think the whole Lonely Island crew is gonna, their work is gonna age really well because it's so idiosyncratic. So, I mean, I want to err on the side of yes, just because I mostly enjoyed the movie. But I think it's also very possible that it could get lost to time. I don't know. I think
it could be. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, like, I think that, one of the things that makes comedy so difficult to really analyze, of course, is that it's in the eye of the beholder. And I do think I could totally see, if I was watching this movie by myself, that my read could have been totally different. And, comedy lives off of communal enjoyment, and being able to watch it side by side with my wife and kind of see her own joy in it too really added to it. Like, just like seeing her like deliriously lose it at Morgan Freeman as a blue crab on the seashore, even though I didn't personally find that entertaining. Like, you just get joy in seeing other people get joy in it. And
yeah, comedy is contagious.
Yeah, exactly. It's contagious.
It could be, this could be the Bill and Ted of the 2020s. And in 20 years we might get a sequel with them in it when they're like 60 years old or whatever.
Right.
Okay. Any closing thoughts on Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar?
I did want to ask, like, I knew that, you're not as hot on the movie as I was. No. But you did say you laughed a couple times. What was your favorite gag in the movie? I
actually wrote down the line that I laughed the most at. There's 2 lines, and they were one-off lines. One, it was when, I forget who plays the hotel concierge dude. Isn't he like famous?
Oh, right, from the Christopher Guest movies.
Yeah. He talks about how they get the room, the family went missing, blah blah blah. That's how they get the hotel room and the nice thing. And he goes, "It's always the husband." I thought that was hilarious because it's a cultural touchstone. We all watch true crime stuff. It is always the husband. And then there's a moment, and this is my favorite moment in the film. They sometimes cut back to the Nebraska Talk Club every so often throughout the film. And there's one moment when they go back and one of the ladies says, "I like looking at wicker, but not sitting on it."
Oh my gosh, that was one of my big laughs too.
The funniest line ever.
Because it's true.
It's true. It's funny because it's true.
Yes.
No, there's definitely lines in here that I liked. It's just, like you said, like comedy. Although Janine Garofalo told me once that that comedy is not subjective. She yelled that at me once in a near comedy club. But that's a true story. But it is subjective for the most part, and like what you get out of it is kind of what you put in your communal experience. For me, it's just not there. It doesn't click. Mm-hmm. But like when we watched Naked Gun a week before, I couldn't stop laughing, and I've seen that movie like 600 times, right? And for other people that were watching, they're like, "Why are you laughing? Like, what's going on here?"
Yeah,
like, I don't understand. Why is this funny?
I'm not a huge fan of that one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like one of those things where if it clicks, it clicks, and it doesn't, it doesn't. So. If you like absurdist stuff, and it's more if you like Kristen Wiig. Like if you like her and her style of comedy, like I think you will get something out of this because it's definitely a showcase for her and her work. Oh man, what are we doing next week? Is it my choice? It is my choice. What did I choose?
You're picking an old movie, and you are going with the 20th anniversary. Speaking of movies that maybe didn't stand the test of time, Christopher Nolan's Memento.
Oh God, yeah, I can't wait. And we have a special guest Molly with us, I think, on that one too. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Right.
Memento is a film that I think, it was a big film for us when we were growing up as teenagers, or like 19 or 20, whenever it came out. It will be strange to revisit that one, I'll tell you that much.
Yep. It's streaming now on Tubi for free, as well as on Prime Video. So check it out, and then check back in with us next week on Film Trace.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.